Let's talk about the future simple tense. Now, the first thing that we should mention is that a lot of grammarians will say that English doesn't have a future tense. And the reason for this is because if you look at the present tense and the past tense, there's more inflection here. And what we mean by that is that the verb itself can be changed to indicate what's going on. So we have walked, for instance, with the ed ending. When we look at the future, we tend to rely on helping verbs such as will or will be, and even the ending itself, walk or walking. These are the basic parts of the verb. There's nothing new here. We're just using the basic parts of the verb to create new constructions. And because of that, some grammarians will say, well, English doesn't have a future tense. Of course, it's still very difficult to describe what's going on if we can't use that kind of language. And so it's natural to say, well, there is a future, but it's good to at least know that grammarians make this claim. Okay, so we have the future simple tense, and let's look next at the basic forms of this particular tense. So we have will go, and you can see that it's actually fairly easy here. We use the same form all the way through. I will go, you will go, he, she, it will go, all the way to the end. Okay, so that part's pretty straightforward. Now there are a couple of alternate ways to create the same effect, or at least something very similar. And one is to use the verb shall. Okay, so if you say, I shall go, that creates the same effect roughly as I will go. This verb shall is much more common in British English than in North American English. It's really on the wane in North America. And even in British English, shall tends to be used to create the future just in the first person. So you would say, I shall go, and then the plural first person is we shall go. We shall go. And then beyond that, we don't tend to create the future with shall. Do note that shall is used for other things other than creating the future like this, but we have a separate video on shall. All right, so then we have the negative form, and all we do here is we just add not or never or some other negation. And if we want to contract this, we could say, I won't go. So won't is kind of a contraction for will not. Then we have questions, and with will and shall, we simply change the word order. So will you go instead of you will go, and shall we go? And shall here again is used occasionally, but primarily to make suggestions. So for instance, if you say, shall we go to the park? And it's kind of like saying, let's go to the park, right? It's to make a suggestion. Again, shall is mostly used in this case in the first person. Shall I go? Shall we go? And really a lot of the times with shall we. That doesn't mean that you can't say will we go sometimes as well, but less so with suggestions. You might say something like, will we be able to accomplish this? Right? It's more of a theoretical question, less of a suggestion. And then the last form is the contraction, and this is fairly straightforward. Instead of saying will, we have apostrophe ll, and then we just put the noun or pronoun or whatever before this. So Bob will go, or I will go. Okay. So those are the basic forms. Let's have a look next at the basic uses. And there are 4 here. The first one is really to create some kind of description of a future event or something happening in the future. So this is the most generic use. If you say, for instance, I will be sad to see you go, so we have will be here, that's the future simple tense, and then we are describing some kind of state of emotion in the future. The second one is a very peculiar use, and this is where we talk about some kind of spontaneous decision, some spontaneous action that we are doing, so spontaneous decision. And let's say somebody says, I have to go, and you say, oh, I'll clean up. That's kind of like saying this right in the moment, right? I'll do it. And it can actually be something you do almost right away. So it's not very far in the future, but it's a spontaneous decision. The next one is where you make a promise or you state some kind of intention. So you say, "We will avenge your cousin's girlfriend," as you should. And so you're talking about what you're going to do in the future or what somebody else will do. And then the last one here, "You will do great." This is a prediction. So this is a prediction talking about what you think will happen in the future. And those are our basic uses for the future simple tense. Now the last thing we'll cover here is just some tricky cases. So in the first case, we have two different ways to say something similar. And what we're talking about here is events that are prearranged. So let's just write this as prearranged events. Let's say that you are scheduled to take a plane the next day, and you say, "We are leaving at noon tomorrow." For these prearranged events, we are less likely to use the future simple tense. So it would sound awkward. Okay, now not necessarily wrong, but we'll just say this is awkward to say, "We will leave at noon tomorrow." If you've prearranged this, you would often say, "We are leaving at noon tomorrow." And then the last three examples here, what's going on here is that in each case we are dealing with an independent clause and a dependent clause. Okay, so we have an independent clause and we have a dependent clause. The order is not totally crucial here. And in the independent clause, we tend to have the future simple tense. Okay, so we have the future simple. There we go. And then in the dependent clause, because we're talking about the future, we might be tempted to use the future simple again. But instead what we have is we tend to have the present simple. Okay, so make sure we have the right color here. The present simple. And this happens in a number of cases. It's not a hard and fast rule, but it's just something to watch out for. So let's go through these quite quickly here. The first one, "We'll stay until the sun goes down." This is our independent clause, "we will stay." There is our future simple, "will stay." And then we have our dependent clause, and it starts with a time marker. And when you have this time marker, you often end up using the present simple. You don't say "the sun will go down," you say "the sun goes down." Seems a bit odd perhaps if English is not your native language, but it's something to watch out for. Okay, second one here. "I will cover your shift." There's our independent clause that can stand by itself as a sentence. We have "will cover," that's our future simple. And then our dependent clause starts with this conditional conjunction here. If you bring me cookies. And notice how again we have bring, present simple, instead of "you will bring me cookies." Last one, very similar. We have a that clause, and in the that clause we have the crocodiles get their food, not will get their food. So those are things to watch out for, especially if you are an ESL student, that when you have this this combination of clauses here, just watch out that often in the dependent clause you still end up using the present simple tense. That's it for the future simple tense.